If you've never heard a wedding dress cry, it sounds like tissue paper trying to hold back a storm. I know, because I sat on my bedroom floor the night before my wedding, smoothing the skirt that everyone said looked like a cloud, and my phone lit up with a message that split my life clean down the middle. It was from my maid of honor, my sister, Lee. A single line, a photo, and then silence. The line said, "I'm sorry," and the photo was of her hand in my fiancé's hand, both of them wearing the cheap silver bands we'd bought as a joke when we were 21. Behind their knotted fingers, a courthouse door. The time stamp said 4:12 p.m. 12 minutes after he told me he was running one last errand. If you've ever had your heart step off a curb without looking, then you know the way the world tilts, the way the air goes thin, the way your name sounds when you say it to yourself and it doesn't quite fit. I said mine out loud in that small room, like a person trying to draw a map back to her body. "I'm Naomi. I'm Naomi." The mirror didn't argue, but it didn't help. I wish I could tell you I screamed or smashed the vase, or went very still like in the movies. The truth is uglier and more human. I laughed. A short, wrong sound like a cough that forgot its job. And then I pressed my palm over my mouth and felt the shudder travel all the way down to my knees. In the hallway, my mother was on the phone telling an aunt from out of town that everything was under control, which is the phrase we use in our family when the house is secretly on fire. I watched myself in the mirror fold the dress back into its bag, one white panel at a time, like putting snow in a suitcase. I thought of the seating chart with Lee's name in gold by my side, of the vows on the nightstand with his name written so carefully the letters looked like they'd learned to stand up straight just for him, of the way he'd kissed my forehead that morning and said tomorrow, like a promise made of warm bread, "If you're still with me, this is the part where I tell you the first betrayal didn't happen at the courthouse. It didn't even happen this year. It started in little places, the way mold starts in the grout. Lee and I were born 18 months apart and raised like twins in a house that counted everything, coins in jars, hours, until payday, apologies, blessings, like we were keeping receipts on survival. Lee went first into every room and learned that charm can be a currency that spends even when your wallet's empty. I learned to watch. She could talk our way out of parking tickets and into scholarships. I could sense when a silence meant danger. When I brought Daniel home from university, she looked him up and down in a way I told myself was protective. When he laughed at something I said in that real way, the one that uses your stomach, she relaxed. "He's good," she said later, like a bouncer letting my future into a club. We all believed her. Daniel and I built a life the way you build a bookshelf you hope will outlast the lease. Careful measurements, soft arguments about where the weight should sit, the miraculous moment when it stands by itself and doesn't fall. He wasn't loud with love, he was steady. I used to joke that if loyalty were a sound, it would be his footsteps coming home at 6:17 every evening. He memorized the names of my coworkers and the bakery owner and the old man on our street who fed the pigeons, as if nomming the small things would keep them safe. He wasn't perfect. He could be thoughtless in that gentle way people are when they've never had to interrogate their own goodness. But he was mine, and I was his, and that felt like enough. Lee, meanwhile, built a career out of almosts. She almost moved to New York with a photographer who promised the world. She almost finished nursing school before deciding that paperwork was a vibe killer. She almost married a bar manager who wore his ambition like a cologne. Each time, she came back home to reset. And resetting meant she borrowed my clothes and slept on my couch and told me I was so lucky in a tone that sounded like gratitude wearing someone else's shoes. I kept making tea. I kept handing her pillows. I kept believing that family is a door you never close, only to learn that sometimes you have to lock it for the house to stand. The week before the wedding was an orchestra of lists. Lee was a hurricane of helpfulness, her hair up, her mouth full of straight pins, her phone buzzing with vendors and cousins, and a florist who kept forgetting we'd chosen blue thistle, not baby's breath. She made a speech about how love was the best kind of risk, and everyone clapped, and Daniel squeezed my hand under the table and said, "She's something, your sister." I answered with a laugh that wasn't exactly a yes. On the morning of the day before, Lee and I went to pick up my dress. It hung in the shop like a promise, and when I stepped into it, I watched my face change the way the clouds change when the sun remembers where it left them. Lee laced me up and said, "I can't believe my little sister is getting married before me." And then she covered her mouth like the words were indecent and laughed and said, I'm kidding. But jokes are just truths wearing a party hat." I turned to the mirror and said, "You will not apologize for being happy." And for a second, I believed myself. Now, in my bedroom, the photo made the dress look like a costume. I called Daniel, and it went to voicemail. I called Lee, and it went to voicemail too. I texted both of them the same word, explain. Then I put on jeans like armor and went to find my mother. She was in the kitchen, elbows on the table, her voice small in that way I remember from childhood on the nights when the mortgage felt like a mouthful of marbles. "We're fine, Auntie," she was saying. "It's all fine." I took the phone gently, told the aunt I'd call her back, and put it down. My mother looked at me the way you look at a stranger who has your face. "What's wrong?" she asked, though she already knew. "They got married," I said. The 3 words hung there like wet laundry. Her hand went to her chest. I saw the moment the news entered her and rearranged the furniture. She didn't wail. My mother is from a generation of women who cry into kettles, so the steam takes the secret away. She stood, put the kettle on, and then she did the bravest thing I've ever seen. She took my phone, opened the photo, looked at it until her eyes accepted it, and said, "Okay, we'll start there." The hours after were the kind of practical that kept me alive. We called the venue. We called the caterer, the DJ, the florist, the airman with the 5 bunk beds where the bridesmaids were supposed to sleep. We called my father, who lives 1 town over and loves us in the quiet way of men who show up with hammers and don't say much. He arrived in 30 minutes and fixed the wobbly table leg, because it was the thing in the room he knew how to fix. He looked at me, looked at my mother, and said, "I'll make calls." He didn't ask who. He just did. Meanwhile, my phone vibrated with messages like hailstones. Friends, cousins, people who use hun in texts you never asked for, all saying, "Is it true?" I turned the phone off because rumors are a second fire, and I only had one pair of hands. Lee and Daniel finally called just after 9. Private number. I answered on speaker with my parents watching me like lifeguards watching a sea with too many rip currents. Daniel's voice first, thin and damp. "Naomi," he said. There aren't words. We didn't plan it." Lee's voice slid in, smoother. "It happened," she said, as if she were reporting the weather. "We were at the courthouse for paperwork for the venue." "We were not," I said, "because you have to learn the shape of truth, even as the room tilts." "We had no paperwork left." She ignored that. "We were talking," she continued, "and it felt right. We've been lying to ourselves. You know that feeling when you realize you've been walking in the wrong direction? We turned around together." She said together like it was a poem. My mother made a sound that I think cows make when they lose a calf. "Since when?" I asked, my voice so calm even I wanted to slap it. "Since when have you two been turning around together?" Silence. Then Daniel, too quickly. "Not long, a few weeks. It was a mistake, but it was." Lee said, "You were always busy, nay. Your job, your lists. He and I saw each other. We don't mean to hurt you." I almost laughed again. "Not mean to hurt me. It's like lighting a match in a hay barn and saying you didn't mean to burn it." "Where are you?" I asked. "We're staying with a friend," Lee said. "We thought it would be worse if we came home." "It would," I said, and the honesty tasted like cold water. "Do not come here." My father's hand was on my shoulder, steady, like a lighthouse. "You will send an email to every guest. You will tell them the wedding is off and that it is your fault. You will copy me. You will tell the vendors. You will reimburse what you can. You will return what you have of mine." I paused. "You will not turn this into a story about your bravery." Lee inhaled like I'd slapped her. "People are going to hate me either way." "Then do one thing that deserves respect," I said. "Tell the truth." We hung up with that awful politeness people reserve for endings they can't explain. My mother sat down and folded her hands like prayer was muscle memory. She said, "If you want to leave the country, we can sell the car." I loved her so much in that moment, I thought my ribs would crack. The next day, the day that was supposed to be my wedding day, I woke to a house full of flowers and food, and people who didn't know whether to wear black. My aunt arrived anyway, with 3 casseroles, and the news she had already told the hairdresser, who told the pharmacist, who told the woman at the bakery, which is to say, the town. The doorbell rang like a bad joke. My father answered and turned away anyone who came to gawk. The ones who stayed were the ones who knew how to hold a room together with their hands. I didn't wear the dress. I wore a white t-shirt because I am, apparently, a person who finds humor in accuracy. I stood in the backyard where we were supposed to have our first dance and looked at the fairy lights my father and best friend had strung the day before, and it felt like standing under a sky that didn't get the memo. Then something in me did a strange, brave thing. It stood up. I took the microphone rented for speeches and clicked it on. People turned in waves, my name like a ripple on their faces. "If you were here yesterday," I said, and my voice didn't shake, "you would have seen me marry a man I loved, with my sister at my side. That didn't happen. What did happen is that two people made a choice, and I am not the person those choices will break." I watched the words leave me like small birds. The food is paid for. The music is paid for. The space is beautiful. Dance if you want to. Cry if you need to. Don't look at me like I'm a ghost. I'm still here. Then I set the microphone down and I danced. Not because I felt like it, but because my body needed to remember it wasn't a house for sorrow alone. People circled me gently, like planets around a star that was working very hard to pretend it wasn't collapsing. My best friend, Imani, put both hands on my shoulders and said, "We are going to make a new memory on top of this one. That way, when you think of this night, the hurt has to share the room." My father danced with me like we did at the kitchen sink when I was 5. My mother didn't cry. She supervised the playlist like the fate of the world depended on it. Sometimes leadership is just hitting next at the right time. Late, when the fairy lights were tired and the last of the brave people were packing leftovers into Tupperware with the solemnity of ministers, my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. A photo of Lee and Daniel at a cheap restaurant, heads pressed together, captioned "True Love Wins." I stared at it until the pixels blurred, and then I laughed. But this time, the sound was steady. True love doesn't need to trample to stand. True love doesn't require a theft. Whatever they had, it might be love, but it wasn't the kind I wanted. The days after were long in the way that grief stretches time. I went back to work because email doesn't care about your heart. People in the office did that half lean, "How are you?" That means, "Please don't cry on me," and I obliged them. I learned that humiliation is a fire that looks different from the outside. To everyone else, it reads like gossip. To you, it's smoke in your lungs. I blocked Lee on everything, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I needed to breathe a different air. I sent Daniel's mother the ring via courier, because we are, despite everything, people who respect the value of things. She sent it back with a note that said, "I'm sorry for my son," which is a sentence that carries 3 generations of women learning to apologize for men they didn't raise. A week later, Lee showed up at my door with eyes that had learned about sleeplessness. She dyed her hair darker, the way people do when they need a disguise from their own mirrors. She didn't ask to come in. "I sent the emails," she said. "I returned the deposits. I paid what I could." She looked at my face for a long time, trying to find a vein to inject an excuse into. "I know you hate me," she said. "I don't," I said, and it was true in a way that startled me. "I hate what you did. Hatting you would make this easier." She flinched like I'd used a sharper word. "You always got there first," she said, a sudden snap in her voice. First in school, first to graduate, first to have an apartment, first to be loved in a way that looked like a picture on a fridge. I was tired of looking at everything you had through glass. Then ask for a key, I said, softer than I felt. Don't smash the window and bleed on the floor. She swallowed. We're pregnant, she blurted, and the air around my head went thin again. I found out 3 days before. We didn't do it to hurt you. We did it because. You did it because you were scared, I said. And you confuse urgency with honesty. The word pregnant hung between us like a traffic light stuck on yellow. I felt my future reorganize itself around it, the way furniture has to move when a piano comes into a small room. A child would exist with my cheekbones and her laugh and his mouth. And none of this was hypothetical anymore. What do you want from me? I asked. She stared at the ground. Permission to be happy, I guess. A sister. I can't give you the first, I said. And I don't know if I can be the second. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I can give your child an aunt who doesn't confuse love with access. I paused. And I can give myself a life that doesn't keep bleeding at the same wound. She nodded like the neck holds up regret. She left without drama, which might have been the most respectful thing she'd done in months. Months passed. Seasons changed. The flowers from the canceled wedding bloomed and then didn't. I moved apartments because walls remember. I took a therapy appointment because I needed a place where my pain wasn't a spectacle or a scandal, just a sentence that could end with a period and not a cliff. I learned to cook for one without sulking. Imani made me climb a hill every Sunday because sweat is grief leaving the body. And if that's pseudoscience, it still worked. My father fixed a shelf in my new kitchen and said, sturdier, like a blessing. My mother came over with soup and left with my laundry because kindness is a chore you don't notice until it's done. Then karma did what karma does best when we stop staring at the door. It used the window. Lee called me from a withheld number, voice raw and oddly small. He's gone, she said, and for a second my heart did a wicked thing and surged with relief until she added, not dead. Just gone, changed his mind. There's someone else. She's 22 and writes poems on napkins. She laughed, a broken sound. He said he'd been lying to himself. I sat down on the floor of my new kitchen and pressed my back against the cupboard because plastic and wood don't flinch at honesty. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. The way a person can mean sorrow for a pain they did not cause and cannot cure. What do you need? Advice, she said. Money, a time machine. I closed my eyes. I can do one of those, I said, and it won't fix this. I didn't say, this is what it feels like, because that would have been vengeance dressed as wisdom. I didn't say, I told you so, because I didn't. I said, I will help with the baby registry. I will sit with you at night when the house is loud with your thoughts. I will not let you set my life on fire again. She cried, real and ugly and human, and I held the phone like it was a rope connecting us over a ravine. Sometimes compassion is the sharper choice. When the baby came a girl with a mouth that looked like it was about to argue with the world, I held her. and felt something inside me unhook from the past and hang itself on a peg labeled future. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "We break the pattern here," and she sneezed like a promise. Lee watched me with a face that had learned something the hard way and said, "You'll be a good aunt." I put the baby back in her arms and said, "Be a good mother." And we both understood that was an invitation and a challenge. If you've stayed to the end, here is the part I want you to keep. Humiliation is not the opposite of love. Indifference is. Betrayal is a teacher with a cruel voice, but it teaches. I learned that boundaries are not walls to keep your life small. They are doors you get to open. I learned that my value doesn't live in someone else's last name or address or a day on a calendar. I learned that karma is not a thunderclap. It's a chair left empty at dinner, a set of rings in a drawer, a registry filled by the person you hurt, and the lesson you didn't want but needed. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do with pain is refuse to turn it into a weapon. Sometimes the bravest is to turn it into a map. My map has fewer people on it now, and the roads are narrower, but the places it leads, they're mine. The next time I say tomorrow, it will be to myself, and I will mean it like a promise I can keep. The first night I babysat my niece, the house sounded like a heartbeat. Not hers, mine. She slept in the bassinet with her lips parted as if she'd fallen asleep mid-argument, and I sat on the couch with the monitor light spilling across my hands like a small, faithful moon. Lee had texted 4 times in 20 minutes from the pharmacy down the street. Did she burp? Is she too hot? Are you sure the swaddle isn't too tight? And then stopped, because even hurricanes discover they can only circle so long before the sea refuses to play. When she came back, her face was damp and clean in the way people look after crying without witnesses. She stood over the bassinet and smoothed the baby's hair with 2 fingers, gentle as apology. "I keep thinking the universe is punishing me," she said, nakedly enough that I had to look away. Like every time she cries, it's because I deserve it. That's a lot to put on a person who can't hold up her head yet, I said, and she huffed a laugh. Bobbies cry because the world is new, not because you're bad. Lee sank down beside me and tucked 1 foot under her like she used to when we watched cartoons on Saturday mornings and argued about who got the bigger bowl. "I don't know how to be someone you can trust," she said finally. I thought I did. I thought if I loved loud enough, it would drown out the ugly parts. But it turns out you can't outsing your own history. She swallowed. "How did you do it? How did you not turn into a blade?" "Who says I didn't?" I said. And when she looked, startled, I added, "I just learned where to point it." We sat in the ordinary glow of a lamp that had no idea what it meant to hold 2 women together with bulb and wire. The baby snuffled. Somewhere in the building, someone laughed like they had never been hurt, and I wished them a long life. Lee leaned her head on my shoulder. It didn't feel like theft this time. It felt like someone asking to borrow what you can afford to lend. "If I tell you I forgave her, thought would be an easy ending. The truth is heavier. Forgiveness came in teaspoons, not waterfalls. It showed up in practicalities. I drove Lee to appointments. I sat with her while she tried to make a budget act like a life raft. I stood in line at the registry office and didn't say. I stood in a different line once, because some ghosts only grow when you feed them. I blocked and unblocked Daniel's mother twice in 1 month, because her messages swung between regret and revisionist history. And I was not required to be a museum for anybody's convenient version. There was a day in late autumn when the air went sharp overnight, and the trees decided, all at once, to stop pretending. I walked past the venue that should have held our vows, and watched a different bride step out for photos, her dress catching the wind exactly the way mine had in my head. My body tensed as if grief had a scent, and I just walked through it. A girl from high school, someone I hadn't seen in 10 years, but who had seen me on the internet, materialized with a sympathetic mouth and an appetite for rumor. I heard he married your sister, she said, reverent as if reciting a miracle. Are you, okay now? Right then, the bride burst out laughing at something the groom whispered, a sound that did not ask my permission to exist. I looked at the girl and said, I'm more than okay. Not because it was the whole truth, but because it was the truth I had decided would steer. Then I went home and cried into my own kettle, and the steam took the secret away and left the room the same as it had always been. That's the thing. Sometimes healing looks exactly like a normal evening and nobody claps. My mother started singing in the church choir again, and every Sunday she texted a photo of a hymn number board like it was a scoreboard, and she'd pulled us ahead. My father began to sit with Lee in the evenings, the way men sit with each other after funerals, saying practical things, fixing what was in front of them, letting the shared silence be the conversation. Imani put me on a rotation of being dragged to new places. Pottery class, make a cup that doesn't leak, babe, that's all. A poetry reading, don't date poets, listening is cheaper. A boxing gym, what if we punch the air and the air forgives us? I learned I could like a man's laugh without handing him my future, and that is not a small miracle. You're waiting for the part where Daniel calls. He did. Twice. The first time, I let it go to voicemail and listened in the morning like you check the weather before deciding whether to need a coat. He said sorry. He said it like a currency he'd only just discovered. He sounded younger than when we met and older than when he left, which is not how time is supposed to work. He said he had made a very bad decision in the right suit. He said he sees it now. He said he was in therapy. I believed him. Then I deleted the message, because belief is not an invitation. The second time, he texted from a new number, a short message that felt like someone putting a hand against a door they used to own. Can we talk? Just to make things right. I stared at it so long the text box went dim. Then I wrote 3 words. No, be well. I did not send a lecture, and I did not send a map, and both of those choices tasted like good bread. At work, my boss asked if I'd lead a new project. You have a way of holding chaos without letting it spray the room, she said, like she was complimenting a janitor and a general at once. The project was a community grant for young women who wanted to train for jobs nobody had told them they were allowed to want. I read applications at my kitchen table, eyes blurring at stories not unlike mine, not unlike Lee's, not unlike the quiet thunder of women who refused to be drafted as furniture in other people's houses. We awarded money to a mechanic in training who'd rebuilt an engine on TikTok with captions like prayer. We awarded money to a girl who'd been told she was too angry for leadership and had decided to build a youth council anyway. We awarded money to a single mother who listed time under equipment and wrote, "I cannot afford it," in the budget column. I cried when we hit send on those emails. It felt like the opposite of burning. It felt like pouring water exactly where it needed to go. Sometimes karma sends you a postcard. Mine arrived as an invitation from the venue that canceled someone in their team had left, and the new events manager had heard about what happened and wanted to offer me a credit for any future celebration. I didn't think I'd ever step foot in those doors again, but the idea of walking in on my own terms felt like power wearing flats. I said yes, not to a new wedding, to something else I wasn't ready to name. When Lee's daughter turned 6 months old, we marked it with cupcakes and paper hats, because every small survival deserved a parade. Halfway through, Lee said, too casually, he wants to meet her. He says he's sober now. From what exactly? I don't know. He says he's sorry. He says he's ready to be a father. My chest went cold, then hot, like grief had learned a new party trick. What do you want? I asked. It's the only question I trust now. I want to not get burned twice, she said, raw, holding the baby like a shield and a miracle. I want her not to learn love like a test. Then you give him boundaries, I said, not to punish him, to protect her. Supervised, daylight, written agreements. If he stumbles, the door doesn't slam, it closes politely. Lee smiled at that, polite doors, and wiped frosting off the baby's nose with a tenderness that made my eyes sting. I'm trying to be a window, she said, our joke-turned pledge. Some days I still feel like a wall nobody asked for. Windows get dirty, I said. You clean them. It's still a window. After everyone went home, I stood in my kitchen with a paper hat on, alone with the soft hum of the fridge and the sudden awareness that I was happy without spectacle. I thought of the venue email and took out a notebook and wrote down a list of things I might want to celebrate that didn't require anyone else's yes. I wrote, finishing the grant cycle. I wrote, first solo trip. I wrote, the day I stop waking up angry. I wrote, a party for women who didn't get the party they paid for. The last one made me laugh, then made me cry, then made me call a Manny who said, babe, we can fill a ballroom. We did. We called it the Unwedding. We rented the venue for an afternoon when the sun would remember the windows. We invited anyone who had a dress in their closet that still tasted like the night the band never played. We told them to wear their joy and their grief in equal parts. We told them the bar was open, but the speeches had rules. No diatribes, just declarations of survival and petty triumphs. I kept the expensive sheets. One woman announced to thunderous applause. My mother brought the choir, and they sang something with harmonies that sounded like scaffolding for a new building. My father fixed a wobbly table leg between toasts and was proclaimed an honorary bride. Lee stood by the gift table and handed out seed packets with tags that said, "Grow new things." I wore my dress, not because I wanted to rewrite the past, but because I wanted to prove cloth doesn't dictate meaning. The skirt rustled, a cloud deciding it didn't need a forecast to exist. When I stepped into the room, a hush fell, not reverent, not pitying recognition. The DJ played the song we had picked, and I danced with Amani, then with my mother, then with a circle of strangers who were not strangers by the second chorus. We raised glasses to the ones who left us, and to the parts of ourselves we had to leave. Lee found me by the window and tugged my sleeve. "He's here," she whispered, and my stomach pitched, then settled. She gestured toward the entrance. Daniel stood in the doorway, smaller than the myth, hands clasped like he wasn't sure what to do with them. He looked at me for permission to be in the same air. I nodded once, polite door. He walked to Lee and saw his daughter, and his face did that human thing faces do when confronted with the consequences and the gift at the same time. He cried a little. He asked if he could hold her. Lee let him hold the handle of the stroller and nothing else. His hands shook. He looked up at me and mouthed, "Thank you." I nodded because some thank yous are not for the past. They're for the future you refuse to ruin. After the unwedding, the venue manager hugged me like a person who has watched too many arrangements get made and undone, and finally got to watch one that made sense. "If you ever want to book for a real wedding," she said in my ear, conspiratorial. "This was a real wedding," I said, and she laughed, not understanding, and that was okay. Not everyone hears the vows you make to yourself. On the way home, I took off my shoes and walked barefoot, dress hem gathered in my hands, not caring about the stairs, because sometimes you earn the right to be a spectacle. The evening light made the city soft. I stopped on the bridge where couples put locks with their names and throw the keys away. I didn't have a lock. I had a ring in my pocket, the simple band I'd mailed back once and received again. I held it over the water and thought about curses and blessings and how ridiculous we are, all of us, trying to trap time in metal. Then I didn't throw it. I put it back in my pocket, not because I was keeping it, but because I didn't need the river to do my rituals. When I reached my building, the neighbor with the rescue pit bull, Mr. Alvarez, who has been a widower since the 90s and waters my window box without asking, was on the stoop. He tipped an invisible hat at my skirt. "You look like a decision," he said. "I am one," I said. "A couple, actually." He chuckled, "Ata girl." That night, I hung my dress on the outside of the closet door instead of hiding it for another year. I took down the fairy lights from a box, strung them around the window, and let the room be brighter than it needed to be. I poured tea. The kettle clicked. the world did a small, ordinary mercy by obeying its own rules. I texted Lee a photo of the seed packet sprouting green in the pot on my sill. She sent me a video of the baby blowing a raspberry with the focus of a scholar. I smiled so hard it hurt, in that good way. If you're waiting for a new love, there isn't one yet. There's space. There's a chipped mug I like holding. There's a bed I've made to only my measurements for the first time in my life. There's a list of places I want to go alone so I can learn the shape of my habits without someone else's elbows in them. There's a note on my fridge that says, in my own handwriting, choose yourself like oxygen. There's a calendar invite with the venue for next year. Anniversary of the day I didn't marry the wrong man. My father calls it petty. My mother calls it healing. I call it mine. This is not revenge. I'm not interested in living in rooms built by rage. This is consequence, which is different, and choice, which is everything. If you're listening at the edge of your own ruined plan, here's the part I want to hand you like a candle in a dark church. Betrayal will try to name you. Don't answer. Make your own name a place you can live. Make boundaries that close softly. Make parties for people who didn't get their parties. Make tea and drink it while it's hot. There will be days you still want to cry into the kettle. Do it. There will be texts you could send that would scorch the earth. Don't. There will be rooms where people whisper, "Is it true?" Walk through them like you own the floor. You survived the worst of what people who loved you did by mistaking fear for fate. Now go love yourself with better information. And if you ever hear a wedding dress cry, sit beside it until it learns a new sound. Eventually, if you listen long enough, it stops sounding like grief and starts sounding like fabric again, ready to be cut into something else entirely. The dress hung there for weeks after the unwedding, a silent witness draped in lace. Some mornings, I woke up and thought it looked lonely, like it was waiting for a cue I had no intention of giving. Other mornings, it looked strong, like it had survived a war with me, and now we shared a truce. I didn't rush it back into the closet. I let it breathe in the open, the way scars need sunlight to soften. Life became ordinary again, but not the same kind of ordinary. It wasn't about surviving on autopilot anymore. It was about noticing the small ways resilience folds itself into a day. Like the way I started watering the seedling on my sill with care, speaking to it sometimes because plants, unlike people, never betray the trust you give them. Or the way I walked through the park without flinching at the sight of couples taking engagement photos. I could see them, genuinely smile for them, and not feel like their joy stole anything from me. Lee called often, sometimes too often. She'd ring late at night, whispering because the baby was asleep, her voice fragile like paper about to tear. "I keep waiting for him to come back," she confessed once. And then I hate myself for it. I told her the truth, even when it hurt. That's not love, Lee. That's addiction to being chosen, even by the wrong person. She cried, and I didn't try to fix it. Some lessons cut whether you hand them gently or not. And then, slowly, something shifted. She started talking less about him and more about her. About the new job at the daycare, where she was learning patience by force, about the woman in her building who babysat when Lee had night shifts, about how the baby's first word might be no, and how she secretly loved that idea. Each time, I heard less desperation and more backbone in her voice. One Sunday, Mom insisted we all eat together, me, Lee, the baby, Dad, and her. It was the first time in months the five of us had sat at the same table. The air was thick at first, like everyone was holding back a different storm. But then the baby grabbed a spoon, banged it against the table like a tiny drummer, and we laughed, real, belly-deep laughter that cracked something open. For a second, it felt like a family again. Not the same one we had before, but maybe a new shape that could still hold. That night, after I got home, I made tea and sat by the window. The fairy lights glowed soft, my seedling now tall enough to need a bigger pot. I thought about how betrayal had once filled every corner of me, and now it was just a shadow still there, but not loud enough to run my life. I thought about Daniel, wherever he was, and felt nothing. Not rage, not longing, just absence. And absence is easier to live with than a wound. I realized then that this wasn't just survival anymore. This was rebuilding. I wasn't the woman waiting to be loved correctly. I was the woman who had learned that love begins with yourself, with the boundaries you keep, with the courage to say no, and the strength to walk forward anyway. And maybe, just maybe, one day I'll fall in love again. But when I do, it won't be because someone picked me. It'll be because I chose them too, eyes open, voice steady, boundaries intact. Until then, I'll keep dancing under fairy lights, making tea, and tending to the parts of me that bloom only when I water them. Because this is what resilience looks like when the storm is over. Not the absence of pain, but the decision to build something beautiful on top of the ashes. I used to think betrayal was the end of the story, that when someone ripped the ground out from under you, you just kept falling forever. But I've learned something different. Betrayal isn't the end. It's the middle, the part where you discover what you're made of when the people you trusted most show you what they're not. My sister took my fiancé on the eve of my wedding. She burned my plans, humiliated me, and left me standing in the ashes of a life I thought was mine. But what she didn't take, what nobody can take, is my choice to keep going. My choice to rebuild, to stand, to love myself louder than the lies. Now, when I look at the dress hanging by my window, I don't see ruin. I see proof. Proof that I survived. Proof that I can rewrite my story. Proof that the worst thing someone else did to me became the foundation of the best thing I ever did for myself, choosing me. So here's the truth I want you to carry with you. You are more than what they did to you. You are more than the betrayal, the humiliation, the heartbreak. You are the resilience that came after. You are the voice that chose silence no longer. You are the future no one else gets to write. And if karma has taught me anything, it's this. Sometimes justice is loud. Sometimes it's quiet. But the sweetest form of justice is living a life so full, so steady, and so yours that the people who tried to break you have no place in it anymore. I am not the woman whose wedding was stolen. I am the woman who walked through fire and came out carrying her own light. And that's how my story ends. Or maybe how it truly begins. Let her have my ex, because the truth is, she didn't steal a husband. She inherited my headache. I walked away with my freedom. Lesson: don't mourn what betrayal takes. Celebrate what it saves you from.